Hello and welcome to Cash Fixes Cars. In today's video, we are replacing rear shocks on a Chevy Express or GMC Savana. Before we get into actually how to do that, I want to let you know that I have a bunch of rear shock options linked down below. Now let's get right into it. The rear shocks on these vans are held on by 2 bolts up top and 1 big bolt through the bottom off of this bracket on the axle. I started out by removing the upper bolts, which are the smaller ones. You do want to be extra careful while you're working on this because if you have good shocks in your car that aren't blown out like mine, there might be some preload on them and they might try to move once you loosen them. Anyway, I went ahead and used my impact gun to loosen up those top 2 bolts. I went back and forth because this thing was a little bit rusty and I didn't want to break them. And then those bolts were out and the top of the shock was free. Then I moved on to the lower bolt here, and this one was super easy. I just held one side with a wrench and used the impact gun on the other side and was able to get that off. Then I tapped this thing out and pulled it out of place, and this shock was completely free. To install shocks back into the van, it's slightly more tricky than removal because the shock is under a lot of pressure when it's new and not all worn out. So you may have to get the top half of your shock secured with those upper 2 bolts and then use something like a floor jack to press the shock and compress it to get that lower bolt in. Now this depends on the shock that you're putting in. If it's a different aftermarket shock like what I used, it was pretty stiff. An OEM one you might be able to do by hand and not worry about it. But that's the process to replace your shock. I hope this helped you out. Again, I have a bunch of options linked down below.